She was born in 1941. If we carefully look at the publication of her works, we would locate her in 1970s towards the end of second wave of feminism. She has also served as television critic for People magazine and as a commentator on BBC Radio. She has been recipient of Truman Capote Award for literary criticism. She has written extensively on Victorian women writers. In 2007, Showalter was chair of the judges for prestigious British Literary Award, the Man Booker International Prize, and presently she is teaching at Princeton University. One of the major contributions of Elaine Showalter to feminist criticism is her phrasing the literary history of women's writing. In her book, Literature of Their Own, she presents three such phases. She named first phase as feminine phase of 1840 to 1880s, wherein British women writers imitated men's literary tradition to secure an acknowledgement of their work in the society. And they presented women characters in their writings the way society and men wanted them to see, means totally dependent upon men and having no identity of their own. A second phase of in the women writing, which is termed as feminist phase, wherein women began protesting against men's dominant themes in literature. They express their own feelings and sufferings as women in their writings. And the third phase of 1920 to 1960, which is termed as female phase, wherein women writers moved on to seek self identity and wrote from their own unique experience of femininity. Second major contribution to her no, second major contribution of Ellen Showalter is her notion of gynocriticism, which we will discuss in this lecture. Some of her best works are Literature of Their Own, British women novelists from Bronte to Lessing, Towards Feminist Poetics, The Female Malady, Women, Madness, and English Culture, Sexual Anarchy, Gender and Culture at the Fordicical, Histories, Hysterical Epidemics, and Modern Media, Inventing Herself, Claiming a Feminist Intellectual Heritage. This essay, Feminist Criticism in the Wilderness, has been taken from Towards a Feminist Poetics. It was written at a time when women's studies had become a recognized discipline at American universities. Feminist theorists held many conferences, they published many journals, and they framed syllabi on feminist theories. The essay is a product of anxiety in American academia about future theoretical manifesto of feminist criticism. And their sole question was, should feminist theories construct a common methodology to analyze literature, or they should remain open ended because of the plurality? The essay is divided into six sections, and I will focus only on two in this lecture. The first is Pluralism and Feminist Critique. Second is Defining the Feminine, Gynocritics and the Woman's Text. Third is Women's Writing and Woman's Body. Women's Writing and Women's Language. Women's Writing and Woman's Psyche. Women's Writing and Women's Culture. In this section, Pluralism and Feminist Critique, we will learn which two poles of feminist literary criticism Showalter talks about in the essay. And we will also know about the causes why feminist literary criticism could not set their own standards or common methodology. Showalter begins this section by mentioning Carolyn Hilbrun and Catherine Stimson, who identified two poles of feminist literary criticism, and they were poles apart. because the first mode of feminist literary criticism focused on the past and the second focused on the future. The first is concerned with the feminist as reader. It offers feminist reading of texts which consider images and stereotypes of women in literature. This mode attempts to expose how women have been characterized as sexual objects in androcentric writings. Androcentric writing means writings with male at the center, writings that have been written from male point of view. Showalter states that as a reader, a feminist studies the exclusion of women in the field of criticism and also the misconceptions that prevail in this field. Not only this, they study the gap in literary history by focusing upon the treatment of women by men in literature. Showalter calls this mode as feminist critique or feminist reading. It is also called revisionary because it depended upon male texts and male interpretations produced on the basis of male experiences. However, Showalter is not content with just feminist critique. No doubt, she says feminist critique is important, but she's of the view that feminist literary criticism must not abandon its hope of establishing some basic conceptual model, because the job of a feminist critic is not just to interpret or to reinterpret, rather, to look towards establishing a theoretical model. Therefore, this mode, which is called feminist reading, seems to be detrimental to further progress. And she writes, so long as we look to androcentric models for our most basic principles, even if we revise them by adding feminist frame of reference, we are learning nothing new. Therefore, she calls for a feminist criticism that is genuinely women centered, women oriented, independent, and intellectually coherent. It must find its own subject, its own system, its own theory, and its own voice. But Showalter finds two obstacles in this endeavor, and the first that she faces was the pluralism in feminist literary criticism, which means to say there is no one feminism and there are many feminism. They are open ended. For example, Marxist feminism feminists study class along with gender in literature, wherein black and third world feminists feel that their cultural histories have been excluded from theoretical work. And that's why the present scenario is it is a set of interchangeable strategies than any coherent school. Second obstacle in developing a common methodologies that Showalter mentions is the reluctance of many feminists to respond to the demand of this dynamic enterprise of women centered feminist criticism. By mentioning Virginia Woolf's experience of being barred from entering the university library, where she says it is unpleasant to be locked out, but it is perhaps worse to be locked in. Showalter is of the view that feminists must consider themselves fortunate to be excluded from this patriarchal methodology. So, from the first section, we learn that Showalter tries to alleviate the anxiety in the feminist theorists on whether feminist literary criticism should remain pluralist, open ended, or not. She highlights the need for feminist theorists to work out a framework they can share, because otherwise, they won't get any respectable place in academia if they only focus on being readers of androcentric texts. And there is always the danger of being relegated to the margin of culture. Second section focuses on the second mode of feminist literary criticism. Showalter compares this mode with New Testament because they focus in the beauty of imagination. Showalter begins this section by saying that defining the feminine practice of writing had begun very long before in 1960s only, when a feminist literary criticism shifted its focus from revisionary mode of reading, means reading androcentric texts, to investigation of literature by women. She says that Patricia Meyersbeck was perhaps the first one to notice the shift from androcentric criticism to gynocentric feminist criticism. Here, gyno means woman. This new mode focused on women as writers, therefore termed as gynocriticism by Showalter. She mentions a few feminists like Simone de Beauvoir, Mary Ellman, Kate Millett, Gilbert Anguber, and of course Showalter herself, who had concerned themselves with women's writing. What Showalter meant by this is that gynocriticism had begun to take place even before there was a word for it. These writers simply asked the questions: where were the women writers? What did they write? How did they come to write? These questions, in the words of Susan Seller and Gil Plain, produced a mass of new material, complicating the understanding of literary history, focused on the significance of gender in the production of writing. According to Showalter, gynocriticism undertakes the study of history, style, theme, genre, and structure of writing by women. Its subject include relationship between emotions and writing styles of women, questions of a female language, the trajectory of an individual or collective female literary career. Peter Barry in Beginning Theory writes, gynocriticism is a broad and varied field, and any generalization about it should be treated with caution. Showalter in the essay further writes that the shift from the androcentric text to gynocentric text is not only seen in American feminist criticism, it can also be seen in French and English feminist criticism. Even though they are gynocentric in their own way, yet they are essentially focused on women's writing. English feminists stress oppression, French feminists focus on repression, and American feminists are concerned about expression. And now all are struggling to find a terminology that can rescue the feminine from their stereotypical association of inferiority. What Showalter emphasizes is that feminists in 1960s were more concerned about the differences between men and women. These differences could also be seen in women's writing styles in their literary history. Gynocritics study these differences in their literary history, style, theme, structure of women writing. In the next section of the essay, Showalter presents four models of differences, and I will discuss these four models in the next video. Thank you.